I am master. I've been called many things: mentor, guide, the voice you hear when silence becomes unbearable. But for tonight, let me be your narrator. The story begins on a Wednesday. Not a special day by anyone's standards. Tessa sat in her car outside an aging office building, the engine off but the air inside heavy with indecision. She was 37, though she felt ancient in a way that had nothing to do with years. The parking lot was half empty, the kind of place that didn't inspire confidence. And yet this was her fourth time here in 2 weeks. Each time she turned around before reaching the door. Today was different. Today she stayed. Inside her purse was an envelope, crisp, white and unassuming. The contents, however, were anything but. Her resignation letter. 12 years in advertising, countless pitches, deadlines and sleepless nights, and all of it was about to end. That letter was both an escape and a final blow, depending on how you looked at it, and that's exactly why she hadn't handed it in yet. The clock on the dashboard blinked, 2:13 p.m. Her boss would be back from lunch by now. She gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles went white, her breath shallow and fast. What if she handed it in and nothing changed? Or worse, what if she was making the biggest mistake of her life?
"You're overthinking it,"
her sister had said over the phone last night. Easy for her to say. Tara had always been the bold one, the risk-taker, the one who moved to Thailand on a whim and opened a yoga retreat. Tessa, by contrast, had always been cautious, sensible, yet here she was, teetering on the edge of a decision that felt anything but sensible. The sound of her phone snapped her back to reality. It was a notification from an app she'd downloaded out of boredom months ago. A daily tarot card reading. She'd stopped checking them weeks ago, but today curiosity won. She opened the app. Judgment. That was the card of the day. Its image filled the screen, an angel blowing a trumpet, figures rising from coffins below. The caption read, "Awakening, reckoning, a call to action."
"A call to action?"
Her eyes lingering on the card.
It's absurd to take advice from a phone app. But then again, wasn't everything absurd these days?
Before she could second guess herself, Tessa grabbed the envelope and stepped out of the car. The air outside was cold, biting at her cheeks, and for a moment it was grounding. She walked toward the building, her heels clicking against the asphalt. Each step felt heavier than the last. By the time she reached the front desk, her pulse was pounding in her ears. The receptionist greeted her with a polite but indifferent smile, and Tessa nodded back, muttering something about needing to see Mr. Daniels. The woman gestured toward the elevator. As the doors closed, the silence in the elevator felt suffocating. Her reflection stared back at her from the polished steel walls, and for a moment she didn't recognize the woman in front of her. She looked tired, but there was something else too, something she couldn't quite place, a flicker of resolve. The elevator dinged and she stepped out onto the 3rd floor. The open plan office was familiar, yet foreign, as if she was seeing it through someone else's eyes. Rows of desks, the faint hum of computers, and the smell of burnt coffee. This had been her world for over a decade, and yet it felt hollow now. Mr. Daniels's office was at the far end. As she walked toward it, she felt the weight of every eye in the room. Or maybe that was her imagination. Either way, her palms were slick with sweat by the time she reached the door. She knocked once, then twice. No response. Her heart sank. Maybe he wasn't back from lunch after all. She turned to leave, but just as she did, the door opened.
"Tessa, what brings you here?"
Mr. Daniels's voice was as gruff as ever, though there was a hint of surprise in it. He stepped aside to let her in. The office was cluttered but not chaotic, a space that spoke of someone perpetually on the brink of being overwhelmed, but somehow managing to keep it together. He gestured for her to sit, but she shook her head.
I won't take much of your time,
she said, holding out the envelope. Her voice wavered, betraying the storm inside her.
I've decided it's time for me to move on.
For a moment, he said nothing. He took the envelope, and his expression unreadable.
Tessa, are you sure about this?
She hesitated.
Yes.
Her voice caught. She hadn't planned a speech. She hadn't even planned to be here. But now, standing in this room, something inside her cracked open.
I've reached my limit with this.
Her words spilling out in a rush.
I can't keep chasing deadlines that don't matter. Selling things that don't make anyone's life better. I need to find something real. Something that means something.
Mr. Daniels studied her for a long moment, then nodded.
I understand.
It wasn't the response she'd expected, but it was exactly what she needed. She left his office feeling lighter, as if she'd been carrying an invisible weight for years, and only now realized it. Outside, the world seemed sharper, clearer. The sky was a piercing blue and the air smelled faintly of rain. For the first time in years, Tessa felt awake, alive. And as she walked back to her car, she found herself thinking of the tarot card. Judgment wasn't about punishment or regret. It was about answering the call, about rising to the challenge of being true to yourself. Ask yourself this: what call have you been ignoring? What truth have you buried so deeply you've forgotten it's there? The trumpet sounds for all of us eventually. Will you let it guide you toward your awakening?